Welcome to the Ostrom Avenue podcast. It is once again a very, very special week on the pod. No Johnny this week, but I'm Ethan, and we are here with a very, very special guest. Last week, we had a WAER alum. This week, we have another WAER alum. It's Matt Bonaparte, co-host of the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Bones, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Seeing your face, Diesel, it just makes me so happy, buddy.
Oh, that makes me happy. So glad to be here with you. Let's get right into it and talk about this 5-0 football team. I mean, you're someone that talks about this team every single day on Locked On Syracuse. So the big story is Sean Tucker, and he's had an interesting season. So when you look at this 5-0 team and you assess his performance, what are some of the biggest things that come to mind early on with Tucker in year 3?
Well, the Wagner game was like the Albany game last year, right? Because he set like all kinds of records in that game and whatnot. And I was actually saying on the pod earlier last week going into the Wagner game that because we did this thing where we played this game called What's More Likely, and we decided between like this or this and whatever. And one of them was Sean Tucker 1,800 rushing or 1,800 total yards versus Shrader 15 rushing touchdowns. I think it was that. And Owen and I both picked Tucker yards. So we were like, if he's still going to get that, he's going to have a crazy Wagner game. And he did. The guy had 218 rushing yards at halftime. Like, that's insane. He had like 3 not brutal weeks, but against Purdue, he was like not good. Against Virginia, he was not good. And so he was probably not happy. And I bet you he's still not happy because in the back of his mind, yeah, sure, he ran for 232 yards, but like it's against Wagner. It was against a team that should not be playing D1 football. They had to play 10-minute quarters. This is like, it was ridiculous. Okay. So I think Sean still wants more, man.
Yeah, and that's just a broad overview. I there's a lot to talk about with Tucker, I think. But the main thing that comes to mind is I think Wagner was the 3rd time this season that there's had to be a TV injury timeout because he was down on the field after a play. Are you concerned at all that maybe, Dino's not really talking. He just always says he's fine in his weekly press conference or his post-game press conference. Are you at all concerned that maybe these, little nippy injuries are building up and maybe that's why his performance is lacking?
Well, that's been the story with Tucker since his freshman year, I remember people were asking, I think my co-host of Locked On Blue Jays, Ben Schulman, would ask that question Sean Tucker's freshman year about Dino about is there a notion in the locker room that maybe Tucker is being overused, and Dino of course shot that down, and then I think the next week he got hurt, which is just great timing, obviously not for Sean but the question. So yeah, I mean, like, do they overuse him? I don't know if they overuse him, but they use him a lot every week. And in a game like that, where he did not need to be playing in the second half, that he shouldn't have been playing in the second half, and he did. So I don't think Dino's ever going to back down from using him, but I don't know if he should be used as much as he is in games that are blowouts.
So you bring up that playing in the second half. What was your immediate reaction on Saturday when you saw him trot back out onto the field?
Well, I mean, I was one of the hooligans on Twitter screaming to take him out. So I wasn't.
Don't call yourself a hooligan. You're not a hooligan.
All of Twitter's hooligans. But I was one of those voices saying that him and Shrader should have come out of the game. And then after the game, they were like, "Oh, we were chasing records." It's like, well, I don't care. So like, I just want you guys to be healthy and win football games. So I wasn't very happy about it.
No, and I don't think a lot of people were happy about that. But something I've realized with Tucker is it seems as if teams are just doing a much more aggressive job of stacking boxes against Syracuse this year and really trying to make Garrett Shrader beat them. And, the common antidote to that would be, play action pass. And Syracuse has done a good job in the passing game. So I guess the question is, do you see teams backing off of stacking the box more, whether it be good teams that have, maybe more talent just along the defensive line and think they could win with the front four, like a NC State, a Clemson, or a Notre Dame with that kind of talent? Or do you think teams will continue to stack the box against Syracuse and try to make Shrader beat them because of how afraid they are of Tucker?
Well, the story last year was any team could beat Syracuse if they forced them to throw the ball. And it's not really the same case this year because Schrader has shown some kind of adequate ability to get the ball in the air. He's not perfect, and he still makes his fair share of awful throws because he's just not a fantastic quarterback. But it's no longer the offense of old where he was just inept, and if you stop Tucker, you won the game. Because, like you said, we saw that against Purdue, and we saw that against Virginia, where they stacked the box, and Syracuse's offense still put points on the board. I think people are going to do whatever they can to stop Tucker regardless. I think that's probably still the number one thing on every opponent's board every week is how do we stop 34. So they're still going to stack the box. They're still going to do whatever they can to take the ball or take the, ability away from him. But I don't know. They're not in the same situation as last year where that wins you the game.
Right. And it feels to me what I've been clamoring for, at least both, on our Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod and on the podcast, is just to set him up in space more, because it feels like 10, 15 times a game, he's just ramming right into the middle of the offensive line. And the middle three, the two guards in the center, are just not winning at the point of attack against any defensive line that isn't, Wagner or UConn at this point. So it feels like, maybe Tucker only gets, 10 to 15 carries a game, but he's targeted, 5 to 8 times in the passing game. And, those swing passes seem to be working a little better. The screens can be set up. They get, smelled out a couple of times, but other times it feels like they work. Maybe this bye week is going to be when Robert and I finally realizes, okay, maybe we shouldn't just pound Tucker into the back of the offensive line when those guys aren't winning at the point of attack against good teams. And we should just try to get him in space more, because the toss pitch plays aren't working either because the offensive line isn't athletic enough to get out there. I don't know what you think about that, but to me, the antidote is throw him the ball more, run him into the middle of the line less.
Yeah, I don't know what this infatuation Robert and I has with just throwing Tucker up the middle 57 times a game, regardless of the fact that the first 56 times didn't work. He just keeps doing it. I don't understand. I don't know what the plan is. And every time the guy has the ball in space, he makes something happen.
He makes at least one or two men miss. At least.
Yeah, like set up a check down, do anything you can to get Tucker in space, because if he has at least a couple yards, he's going to turn into at least a 5-yard gain. That's how good the guy is. But if you're just having the offensive line, they're acting like they have the 90s Cowboys offensive line, and they do not. Okay, Carlos Vettorello has shown us that he is going for the record for snap infractions and and false starts on the year. He is going for the single season record. That guy is awful. And Dakota Davis, Kalan Ellis, and Chris Bleich aren't far behind him. Bergeron's fantastic. We all know that. And he's actually has a chance at the NFL. But the other 4 guys are not making Tucker's job easy. We saw Tucker take snaps at wide receiver in training camp. Show us something. Show us anything. And we saw him take a couple snaps there in a couple of games. I think the Purdue game, if Shrader led him on one of those passes where he was out wide, it was a touchdown, but he fell behind. So they're trying, but ultimately, give him a toss. Do anything. Just get him in space. I 100% agree with you.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Anai, you mentioned the guys in front. So let's talk about those guys blocking for Garrett Shrader and move off of Tucker a little bit. I guess the biggest thing Johnny and I have been trying to decipher through these first 5 weeks is who gets, I guess it's probably not one single entity, but who gets the most credit for Garrett Shrader's development? Is it, do we think it's a, Robert and I? Do we think it's a, Jason Beck, who, obviously we don't hear from those guys a lot because, assistant coaches don't talk to the media. does Dino get more credit because, he brought those guys in and now his quarterback's better, or has he been doing the coaching? Or is it that Garrett, worked on his own throughout the whole offseason? I don't know if we have a definitive answer, but if you had to pinpoint it, who would you say that you think has helped Garrett the most out of anyone?
Well, I think Anai is fantastic. And I think Beck's really good as well. I think you have to give both of those guys credit. I mean, if you just look at Brennan Armstrong, coming into the year, he was touted by PFF and a load of other places as one of the best quarterbacks, not in the ACC, but the country. And that's because he had such a fantastic season last year with Anai and Beck at Virginia. And now Armstrong's bad this year. Like Brendan Armstrong's numbers are awful. We saw him in the Dome a couple of weeks ago. He wasn't great. Like
A
he's
lot
not
of bad
good.
overthrows. Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of shows you, I mean, what's the common denominator of good offenses this year? Virginia was fantastic last year. Now Syracuse is great. The one thing they have in common, Anai and Beck. Those guys have been absolutely fantastic for Syracuse. They have made this offense doable for Garrett Shrader and put him in a position to succeed every time. So I think those guys deserve all the credit in the world.
Yeah. So I guess when you watch the game, what do you think is making him better this year than last year? Is he going through his progressions better? Is he, making more quick decisions? What is it like footwork? It feels like his, arm motion. He still has kind of like that, like shot foot arm motion.
He still throws the ball as if he's throwing it with the wrong hand.
Yeah.
Like that's the one thing. Like he still, like Phillip Rivers always threw the ball weird. But it
don't
came
come
out
at my
like a
guy.
rocket.
Don't come at my guy,
No,
Phillip Rivers.
I'm not. I'm saying that you can throw the ball weird and make it work, but Shrader just looks like he's throwing with the wrong hand. But I mean, I like the fact that he's not. I mean, I guess he never was, but I like that he is using his legs to get first downs more often instead of just trying to go for big plays. But he just also is throwing the ball better. Like that ball he threw to Damian Alford was an NFL throw against UConn. That was a dot. Perfect throw. I mean, it was
UConn also probably had the worst pass defense I think I've ever seen.
Sure, but he still had to put the ball in Damian's hands, and he did. And then the Aronde throw was a great one at the end of the Purdue game. So he's made a couple of really nice shots, but we also see. I mean, we have seen him this year play pretty poorly. I mean, in the Virginia game, that sack he took where he just ran 12 yards backwards and just laid down, I was screaming at the television. That was insane. And then the fact that he just wouldn't throw the ball away. I've never seen a quarterback scramble, and then just run 7 yards backwards and run out of bounds with the ball in his hands. I mean, that was absurd. So he's still got a long way to go, but he has been better.
He has. I'll give you that. I was at the Purdue game. I saw that first half, first 3 quarters where he was inept, honestly. And if his first read wasn't open, he ran. And it worked sometimes, but I think he had like 15 rushes for 70 something yards. So you're like, oh, okay, that's decent. But when you have an average of what, maybe around 5 yards per carry and you're facing third down and long, that's not going to work every single time. And I don't know if that's more blame on Shrader not going through his reads or if it's on his receivers for not getting open. I tend to think it's more on the receivers and that the lack of talent on the outside isn't going to, get separation against really talented secondaries of, a Purdue or, high caliber ACC teams. So if you're looking at Shrader, I guess do you think he's running too much or do you think that's just a product of the offense? It's those not design runs, but more scrambles.
If it didn't work all the time, I'd say he's running too much, but it works all the time. Like he runs for a first down. I don't know how many times a game, but enough for me to be comfortable with him doing it. If Syracuse had a quarterback that didn't have the ability to run and had a good offensive line, I think that wide receivers would be getting the ball a lot more. But obviously, if Shrader can run and this offensive line is going to collapse, I mean, this is a little bit of a stretch maybe, but I'm actually curious to see what you think about this. Tommy Devito has been playing so well this year. like so well. I think he has 9 touchdowns to 2 interceptions at Illinois. They beat Virginia 24-3. Like that guy has just been setting the world on fire as a part of the Fighting Illini, or as I like to say the Fighting Devito. Yeah, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's got over 1,000 passing yards already. Completion percentage of 70. Like he has been a dog. Kind of makes you think, does Dino's offense ever work when you don't have a mobile quarterback? Because Dungy was good. Dungy ran a lot. Not as much as Shrader, but he ran a lot. Devito got sacked so many times. And I am one to argue that it was a lot due to his pocket presence rather than the offensive line itself. But you also have to give credit that the offensive line was not very good. And now Shrader comes in and he can move whenever he needs to, and it's working again. So I think there's something to be said there. But
that's interesting. I guess you look back even further than Dungy. Mahoney wasn't a mobile quarterback. He wasn't, the best pocket passer in the world, but he still put up some incredible numbers at times when, Dungy wasn't playing or Dungy was injured.
True. That's
so
fair.
I don't know if you could say it's just a pocket passer thing, but I think when, you haven't recruited particularly well at offensive line and, you have 1 out of 5 starters who are, set at least average, you need a mobile quarterback to make up for those deficiencies. So I think that's why Shrader is more successful.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the offensive line has still been brutal. I really wish they were where everybody thought they were going to be. I honestly would say that they're maybe the only position group that was overrated going into the year because everybody else, I mean, people were really hyping up that O-line. Stephen Bailey was telling us that it was going to be the best since 2018. In 2018, that O-line was fantastic. Coda Martin, Sam Heckel, they were so good. I missed that O-line. I saw Coda Martin at a gas station once when I was a freshman. He was massive. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
He was huge. I was like, oh my gosh, like that guy's an NFL offensive lineman. It's crazy.
Yeah, big guys. So I guess my final question about Garrett Shrader is, how successful do you think he can be against good teams? The likes of an NC State, against the Clemson. After what we've seen against Purdue and Virginia, the 2 best teams Syracuse has faced from a talent perspective, he was iffy at best. I'm not going to – Syracuse obviously has a chance to win, but how can Garrett Shrader perform against teams with the talent like that?
He might get killed. Like, he might get crunched. I don't know. Like, I really – the thing is that this season, Louisville, we saw a new Shrader. He was insane, and everybody was rejoicing. It was like, wow, this guy can throw the ball. They're driving. He's doing it with a really bad receiving core. Like, this is nuts. Then UConn, he did it again, but who cares? It was UConn. And then, like you said, Purdue and Virginia, it was 2021 Shrader for at least the majority of the game. After the Purdue game, Shrader's like, I was dealing with something and I wasn't ready to play. So you kind of gave him an out there, I guess. But then Virginia came around and he wasn't great. So I find it hard to believe that he's going to come out against a team like NC State or Clemson and just set the world on fire. Like, you have to imagine he's going to struggle. And I don't know what Anai is thinking, because if you and I are thinking that, they have to be thinking that, right?
They have to. Yeah.
So what are they going to do? Like, Anai, this will be very defining for Anai. If he can win one of those games, he really is like, he is a guru at that point, because he's going to have to cater the offense in a way he hasn't before and find out a way to get Shrader to make completions and whatnot without being killed by that defensive line. So that's going to be really telling, and I don't have confidence in those games. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think it's much more likely they win one of the games at home with the crowd behind them. I think there will be very good showouts for NC State and Notre Dame from the Syracuse fan base, probably the biggest crowds of the season. But one more point I'll add on Shrader is the last 2 weeks I've walked past him on campus multiple times, and he's had a precautionary walking boot on his left foot. So.
Really?
So this is something I mentioned on the pod with Johnny as well, but I've seen him multiple times before Virginia and before Wagner with a boot on his foot. And then he's looked fine in the games, moving around fine. So maybe he just twisted it
He's
at some
probably
point and he had to, just wanted to play it really, really safe during the week. But, just walking around campus, I have seen him with a boot. So maybe that's impacted him at all, but he hasn't showed it when he's running on the field. I don't know if you've noticed anything at all with that.
No, he's probably fine. I think they've done that with guys in the past plenty. Because I can't remember who it was, but I definitely saw that with somebody like my sophomore year or something, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
but I think he's gonna be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the NFL earlier with Matthew Bergeron. Another guy who the NFL has been looking out for is definitely Garrett Williams, and he has been absolutely fantastic so far this season. As really has this defense. I mean, the only time they really struggled was against Purdue, and that was when you had a guy like Charlie Jones, who's just fantastic. It was probably the worst game Garrett Williams has played at Syracuse. But going against a speedster like Jones doesn't really match Williams's, skill set where he's, a tough physical ball hawking corner. And when you're going up against a speedster like Jones, who's just going to run a straight line down the field, and you're put on an island against him with no help over the top, that's usually, not going to help. So when you look at this defense, you got Garrett. Deuce had a pick six against Wagner, but I think it's a good thing that things have been quiet when it comes to Deuce, because if things weren't quiet, then you'd have a cornerback two problem. Things have been quiet, which is a good thing. Michael and Marlowe have been terrific at linebacker. And the big question coming into the season was the defensive line. And I want to say I've been pleasantly surprised by them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with an injury to Tyler Lockett, I keep saying that Terry Lockett. I say that like every week. Terry Lockett's injury, he's out for the year. Another guy, Stephon Thompson's out for the year. Lockett's out for the year. Isaiah Jones is out for the year. Elmore's out for the freaking year. I don't know how many more. Nobody else can get hurt. Like really, I'm really hoping nobody else gets. I mean, I didn't want those guys to get hurt, but anyway, the defensive line's been awesome. Really, really awesome. Caleb Okechukwu has risen into the role that I don't think many people thought he would. Steve Linton's been really solid, even though he's a little bit undersized to put his hand on the ground. And some of the freshmen, I don't know if they're all freshmen, but the new guys like Kevon Darton, Jatice Gear, Elijah Cundiff. I mean, those guys have been really, really solid. And I don't think, I mean, they're all question marks coming into the season, but at the same time, that means like somebody's going to surprise you, right? So, and they have. So I think you're right to say it was a very pleasant surprise from the defensive line.
Yeah. So the one big thing that's nagging at me with the defense is what happens if someone else goes down? How do you get someone to step up? Because we've seen these guys come up. We saw Derek McDonald step in for Stephon Thompson, but he's missed the last couple of games. We've seen Elijah Clark and Jihad Carter miss time. We've seen Justin Barron was ejected for targeting and then missed the first half of one game. So there have been times where the secondary has been a little bit thin, but feels like someone else is always stepping up. So if I had to ask you, what is the one concern you have about this defense that doesn't relate to injuries? Is there any concern you have that does not relate to, another guy getting injured?
I would say that third linebacker spot, but anybody you plug in has been good.
Yep.
McDonald was good and then kind of fell off again in the Purdue game, but he was okay. But then Leon Lowry and Anwar Sparrow have been fantastic, stepping up there. Honestly, I don't. This defense has just been so sound that it doesn't worry me. I mean, the credit they deserve from that Virginia game, they kept him in the game, dude. So many times they had to go back to the defense, and every single time I was like, all right, here's the game, it's over. And the defense just kept him in. That Coley deflection at the end, the Garrett pick, they were just so good. And you just have to give them so much credit because they really won you that game. As well as Andre Schmidt. So I really have no bone to pick with the defense.
Speaking of the defense, it seems as if most of the defensive starters are also playing on special teams. And special teams has been something I think a lot of people in Syracuse have talked about over the past few years, and how putrid, especially last year, it was when Dino decided he was going to be the special teams coordinator himself And
Ridiculous.
that worked out swimmingly. Now he's brought in Pablo Gaszewski, and I mean, outside of Andre Schmidt missed one kick and Trevor Pena had one fumble. I can't really think of any other miscues on special teams so far this season. They've blocked multiple extra points. It's just been a massive improvement. I mean, going to average would be an improvement for the special teams, and it feels like they're average.
Look what happens when you put some effort into it and you hire somebody for it. I mean, Dino being like, I got that, I'll take care of that, was absolutely ridiculous. They were so bad. And it was just astonishing that they were like one of 3 programs without a special teams coordinator or something. So yes, they got a coordinator and they got better. Crazy how that works.
Crazy. And it seems as if they're benefiting from Garrett Williams and Deuce Chestnut being the gunners on the punt team. And you got guys like Marlowe and Michael who are in there to block for Max von Marburg, who has just been terrific at punter, right? Who doesn't love a good Australian punter?
From Wagga Wagga. I love that guy.
Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. Everyone loves saying that. And Schmidt, 5 for 5 against Virginia. He's been really good so far. I personally still have my reservations about Andre Schmidt, but it feels like he's getting back into the good graces a little bit. Would you say?
Totally. What do you have reservations about him for?
He wasn't very good the last couple of years.
Well, he was terrible the last couple of years, but he's back. That's the whole thing.
Exactly. I need to see him make a big kick on the road. He's only been kicking in the dome.
Well, they've only had one road game.
True.
It was UConn. Well, so what do you want from him? But Andre's been the man. He's back, dude. It just seems like he's not in his own head anymore. So that's good because he was just unbearable last year. And he's back.
Absolutely. Special teams is back. So let's close things up by talking a little bit about Dino. Dino, is it a hot take to say he's the most polarizing man in Central New York? Is that a hot take?
I don't know. You're gonna have to come back to me on that one. I'm thinking of a list of people in Central New York, or men, I guess, because you said men.
The most polarizing guy. He had his great season in 2018 and was rewarded handsomely with the extension he got on his contract. And it took a few years to build back up. And now this team is 5-0 for the first time in 35 years since before my father was a student. So that could tell you how long ago that was. But do you think Dino is back in the good graces? How excited do you think people are, your listeners, our listeners are, that Syracuse is at this point again? And how sustainable do you think Dino's model is?
This has been controversial. Okay. Owen and I did a mailbag episode earlier in the week where we were asked about how do we feel about Dino. And Owen said that feels no different and that it's all the coordinators that are getting this done. And Dino doesn't deserve to be lifted up on the table or whatever. And people were not happy about that answer.
I have to say I agree with him. I agree with him.
Somebody tweeted at us that we were getting killed on Facebook, and it was just a post that said, "That's it. These Locked On Syracuse kids are idiots. They're idiots." Which I thought was funny. So, I mean, if you want to go out there and say that Dino should be, given an extension or whatever, that he's the best coach in college, in the ACC, whatever, because he's 5-0. I disagree. Dino is having a good year and whatever, but the moment that they start losing, everybody's going to be back to that guy stinks and that guy's got to go. Like, it is so crazy to me how people can flip-flop like that. People spent 3 years saying that Dino needed to be fired, and now that he's won a couple games, they're like, he's the best. He's the greatest of all time. I mean, I didn't say that. So, I don't know. It's you gotta. I think you should give Dino some credit, totally. But I'm not going to go out there and say he's Nick Saban because he's not. And this 6-game stretch coming up is going to be very telling. That's all I'll say. What
do you think he needs to do in this 6-game stretch? Like what record do you think Syracuse needs to be at for people to even be like, okay, he is that guy?
I'd be like over the moon if they won 3 of these games. Over the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they won the Notre Dame game, the FSU game, and the Pitt game, and they lost NC State, Clemson, and Wake Forest, I'd be over the moon.
I think even 2-4. I think even 2-4 is. I was
about to say that would work too, but they just can't lose all of them. Yeah, they just can't go into the final game with a chance to go 5-7. They can't. They have to.
That would admittedly that would be hilarious. If
it would be very Dino.
It would be great content.
Classic Dino. But it would be like, oh my gosh. They just need to win one game. Like, just figure it out once. Coming out of the bye week, I think Dino, aside from the 2018 years, like 2-18 or something after the bye week in his career. So, like, I am a little bit worried. And in November in his career, he's like 6-18.
Right.
So, like,
especially outdoors too.
Like, I'm a little bit worried, but it's going to be very telling.
It will be very, very telling. Which game are you most looking forward to watching in the 6-game stretch?
I mean, I'm excited for the Notre Dame game because I think the Dome's going to be packed for that, even though Notre Dame's not good. They're not good, but they're not Notre Dame.
Right. They still have Notre Dame talent.
They're beatable. Right. They're just not Notre Dame. So I'm excited for that game because I think they have a chance of winning that one. Also, it's in the Dome. So, yeah.
That should be really, really cool. Bones, any last takes you have to add that I didn't ask you about before we sign off here on the Ostrom Avenue podcast?
I have no takes, but I was told to tell you hello from Ben Shulman, and that if he were around, he'd be winning Ostrom picks.
I'm 13-2.
He said he didn't care. He was like, I know Diesel's on a heater, but I don't care. I'll be beating him.
Ben will be getting the invite back on the pod very, very soon. I know he's probably upset that we had Owen on before him and now you on before him, but he's a busy guy. What can I say? He's a busy guy. So Bones, thank you very, very much for hopping on. Really appreciate it. Your insight is great as always.
Well, thanks for having me, buddy. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Of course, that will do it for another edition of the Ostrom Avenue podcast. No weekend coverage this week because there is no game to tweet about. But next week when Syracuse hosts NC State, we'll have a new podcast previewing that game. And as always, you can find all our coverage on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod, where you'll find Ostrom picks like Bones just mentioned. You'll find our podcast and you'll find our live in-game tweets. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And our video interviews are also available on our YouTube channel. You can search up Ostrom Avenue Podcast to find that as well. All right, with Matt Bonaparte, I'm Ethan Frank signing off. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week to preview NC State.